Seated in the tense silence of a family mediation session, I locked eyes with him, my former adversary, whose gaze ignited a forbidden desire that pulsed through me with the promise of long-buried hope. Amid the charged atmosphere of shattered alliances and the looming threat of a renewed business partnership set to destroy everything, I realized that our dangerous secret was about to upend the fragile order of our lives. Chapter 1: Fractured Beginnings. Michael stepped into the ancestral hall, feeling the weight of unresolved family grievances. The home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage for a long overdue confrontation. As he paused at the drawing room threshold, he observed relatives in tense clusters, their faces mirroring his own fears and memories of past conflicts. His inner monologue criticized him. This is the night everything changes. Michael's mind raced with memories of negotiations and a crumbling business alliance. The room buzzed with conversation, underscoring the underlying tension. Approaching a group of family members, Michael noticed someone unexpected, Damian, his former adversary. Their eyes met, sparking old memories of boardroom battles and a rivalry tinged with something more. "Michael," Damian greeted, his voice a mix of challenge and warmth. The word cut through the gathering's noise, carrying the weight of their shared history. Michael replied in kind, acknowledging their past and hinting at a possible truce. As they spoke, their old rivalry began to transform into an unspoken affection. Michael's pulse quickened, not just from business stress, but also from the tension between them. The familiar room felt too small for the complex emotions swirling between them. Michael questioned his past rigidity, reconsidering reconciliation, not only for the business, but also for resolving the deeper conflict with Damian. A clink of crystal drew his attention to the table where critical family decisions loomed, a reminder of fragile trust and potential conflict. As the night wore on, Michael's gaze met Damian's with a spark of challenge and intimacy. He wondered if it was too late to let old grievances melt into understanding, maybe even affection. The thought left him between relief and trepidation. In that fragile moment, Michael realized the night was far from over. With the promise of a faltering partnership renewal and an unconventional love, he braced for the journey ahead. His heart pounded with anticipation, and as he glanced at Damian, a silent question lingered. What would happen next? Unanswered, Michael stepped toward his destiny, leaving behind old grievances and embracing the possibility of new beginnings. Chapter 2: Old Wounds and New Encounters. The dim lighting of the private dining room did little to mask the tension that had been simmering for years. As the pre-mediation dinner commenced, the protagonist, Marcus, found himself seated across from Nathan, his sworn adversary, and once upon a time, a trusted colleague. The room pulsed with an unspoken history, every glance a reminder of shattered alliances and bruised reputations. From the first clink of cutlery against plates, the conversation veered dangerously close to territory that was better left undisturbed. Their words, measured and deliberate, danced around the topics of past disagreements. It wasn't long before Marcus, his voice low and edged with both anger and regret, recalled financial promises broken and bitter betrayals. Nathan's eyes darkened in response, his tone equally deliberate as he defended his side of the story, his words carefully cloaked in professional integrity, yet laced with personal hurt. At one point, as their voices grew more intense, a heated question pierced the veil of civility. Do you ever wonder if we could have done this any other way? It was a challenge disguised as inquiry, a test of resolve. Nathan's reaction was a pause, a slight softening of his steely gaze that betrays an emotion not often seen, vulnerability. It was brief, as if he instantly rebuffed the feeling with a quick, dismissive frown. But it was enough for Marcus to feel that the enemy he hated might be more alike than he had ever dared to admit. The air thickened with the weight of their shared history, yet in the midst of the verbal sparring, small, almost imperceptible gestures began to alter the dynamics of their old animosity. At one point, when a comment hit too close to a painful memory, Nathan's knuckles whitened around his wine glass, and Marcus caught sight of an unintended sigh escaping his lips, a silent admission of regret. Moments later, as the conversation progressed, a mutual smile briefly tugged at the corners of their eyes during a remark that made light of an old administrative fiasco they both endured without reckoning. In that instant, it was as though the years of hostility paused, just long enough for both men to acknowledge that beneath the layers of hurt and competitive spirit, they carried scars of similar battles. Their dialogue swirled between personal indictments and reflections on the choices that had led them here. "We have more in common than you think," Nathan murmured almost to himself, as he recalled the countless late nights spent wrestling with impossible decisions, the same decisions that had not only marked their careers, but also redefined their very identities. Marcus felt the admission keenly. The realization struck him that every confrontation they had ever had was not solely about rivalry, but about the shared anguish and ambition that both had struggled with. This connection was buried deep beneath the exterior of hostility, gradually surfacing as both men were forced to reconsider the nature of their past and the possibility of a future that required them to move beyond the cycle of blame. The transformation in their demeanors was subtle yet profound. Marcus, who had grown accustomed to responding with sharp retorts and rigid defenses, found himself momentarily disarmed by Nathan's introspection. His own carefully constructed barriers began to thaw under the unexpected admission. Between the pauses and biting retorts, there were glimmers of empathy and an acknowledgement of each other's professional integrity that had once united them as allies. The crescent-shaped scar of time and regret seemed to recede, leaving behind a tentative bridge that suggested reconciliation might be possible. As dessert was served, a delicate affair of bittersweet chocolate mousse and a whisper of citrus, the intimate setting grew softer, the embers of conflict now interlaced with hope. Marcus and Nathan's conversation shifted from recounting old wounds to pondering about rebuilding not just business alliances, but also the trust that had once made them formidable partners. The mediator's upcoming session loomed over their heads, a reminder that the time for concealment and resistance was drawing to an end. The promise of an open session hinted at a future where the wounds of the past might begin to heal. Throughout the course of the meal, every exchanged glance and cautious acknowledgement added layers to the relationship. A slight leaning forward when the other spoke, a raised eyebrow and silent recognition of shared adversity. These were the moments that spoke louder than any of their arguments. Each word, each softened gesture, was a small but significant step towards an understanding that the hatred they had nurtured was as much a symptom of unresolved personal struggle as it was of professional discord. By the time the plates were cleared and the final course had been savored, both men were left with a conflicted mix of resolve and introspection. The dinner had not resolved their disputes fully, but it had marked a turning point, an unforeseen opportunity to confront the past without losing sight of the possibilities that lay ahead. As they departed, Nathan's slight nod and Marcus's measured smile promised that, while the journey to reconciliation was just beginning, perhaps the dead weight of old wounds could finally start to mend in the light of newfound understanding. Chapter 3. A Session of Reconciliation. The room was bathed in the low, forgiving light of an overcast afternoon, and as the family gathered for the mediation session, the air seemed to hold a fragile promise of change. For years the unspoken wounds between them had festered in silence, building invisible walls that crumble ever so slowly with each shared memory and unburdened tear. Today each heart seemed to beat a little faster, aware that the conversation about to unfold would force them all to confront not only the ghosts of their past, but also the remnants of pride that had held them apart. Sitting around a long polished table, the family mediator, Miss Arden, took a deep breath before addressing the group. Her voice was soft but resolute, inviting each person to speak honestly and without reservation. In that moment, the accumulated weight of years of rivalry and miscommunication began to lift, replaced by a tentative willingness to acknowledge the pain each had endured. The silence that had once filled the spaces between words was now charged with unsaid apologies and forgotten grievances. At the center of the table sat Marcus and Julia, whose troubled past was woven into the fabric of the family's history. Their eyes met momentarily, a silent understanding passing between them. For both, the session had become a turning point, a fragile moment where vulnerabilities were exposed and guarded hearts showed signs of softening. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice trembling as he recounted the chain of misunderstandings that had led to years of bitter rivalry. He described moments when anger had blinded him to the painful realities shared by those he once called family. Each word was like a small salve on old wounds, rippling across the tense atmosphere. Julia listened intently, her gaze fixed on Marcus with an intensity that spoke of both sadness and understanding. It was in that moment that she too found the courage to divulge secrets that had long been hidden beneath the surface of anger. She talked about the silent nights when regret had kept her awake, and about the realization that the very things she once despised in Marcus were reflections of her own hidden insecurities. In her voice was a quiet admission that revenge had been a poor substitute for the genuine connection they both had once known. The emotions in the room swirled, a mix of sorrow, relief, and the faintest glimmer of hope. As Miss Arden guided the conversation, the mediator's gentle interjections paved the way for honesty without accusation. She asked each family member to share not just their version of events, but the feelings that had fueled their actions. This approach allowed long-held resentments to dissolve into a collective introspection. One by one, the members of the family began to unspool their stories, exposing their vulnerabilities like fragile secrets, guarded in silence for far too long. In a particularly stirring moment, an elderly relative recounted a memory of a family reunion long past, a time when laughter had been the binding force that transcended minor conflicts. That memory became a mirror reflecting what they could regain if they were willing to bridge the chasms of misunderstanding. The dialogue, though filled with raw admissions, was imbued with a sincere yearning to rebuild the connections that had once been the foundation of their lives. The session slowly revealed how interlocked their pain truly was. Marcus, with tears shining in his eyes, admitted to feeling betrayed by the very people he had tried so hard to protect. His vulnerability was met with quiet nods of empathy. Julia, too, allowed herself to be vulnerable, acknowledging that her own stubbornness had kept her locked in a cycle of isolation. The admissions were painful yet cathartic, a reminder that healing could only begin when the truth was shared, no matter how bitter it might taste. As the hours passed, the initial rigidity of defensive stances gave way to a more tender, authentic exchange of empathy. The family began to see that the shared past was not a battleground for blame, but a common ground for reconciliation. Tentative exchanges now replaced the old familiar barbs of rivalry, with a careful exploration of remorse, regret, and the possibility of forgiveness. The mediator's calm guidance enabled these raw feelings to channel into constructive dialogue, marking the session as a critical step toward healing. Although no single conversation or confession could erase years of hurt, the breakthrough was evident in the softening of voices and lingering hesitations, now coupled with hopeful pauses. With each admission and reflective silence, it became clear that affections, once obscured by anger, could be reawakened. As the meeting drew to a close, there was a shared look among those present, a silent acknowledgement that this was only the beginning of a renewed path. The heavy, lingering shadow of rivalry was being slowly illuminated by the light of understanding, setting the stage for the steps yet to be taken on a long road towards both familial unity and personal transformation. Chapter 4. Partnership Reunion and Hidden Confessions. The early morning light spilled softly over the glass panels of the boardroom, where two destinies were about to converge once again. Iris sat at the polished mahogany table with measured anticipation. Every detail of her professional poise belied the storm of emotions hidden beneath. Across from her, Damian meticulously arranged documents as if each piece represented a cornerstone of their future. Today was not merely a business meeting, it was both a renewal of a cherished partnership and the invitation to a truce born out of past trials. As agreements were read and signatures etched, the room was filled with a quiet intensity. The old rivalries and tentative resentments that had once defined their interactions now began to dissolve, replaced by a mutual recognition of both the necessity and possibility of unity. Iris glanced up, her eyes meeting Damian's with a tenderness that belied the stern professionalism of minutes before. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between them. The contract on the table was as much a symbol of their renewed determination to join forces as it was an emblem of the change that had taken root in their hearts. Damian's voice, steady but imbued with a rare vulnerability, broke the formal cadence of the discussion. "Iris," he began, his tone soft and deliberate, "today is more than a business commitment. It's the start of something that I've been too afraid to admit for too long." His confession hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh paper and brewed coffee. Each word was like a gentle tremor that sent ripples through the hardened facade that both had constructed over the years. In that moment, the distance between the boardroom table and the space that now held all their shared secrets seemed to vanish. Iris felt as though every conflict they had endured and every long night spent wrestling with doubt had all led to this crucial point. The partnership was her sanctuary, but unexpectedly, it had also become a canvas upon which her personal vulnerabilities were being painted in daring strokes. The business formalities were no longer separate from her inner life. They had merged into a singular pursuit of trust, forgiveness, and passion. Their eyes locked in a silent conversation that belied the professional veneer. A heartbeat passed, laden with the promise of something long deferred. Iris's pulse quickened, each beat affirming the intensity of their connection, a connection that transcended quarterly reports, deadlines, and profit margins. Damian set aside the pen, his hand lingering near hers as if drawing strength from the physical proximity. His soft declaration had opened a channel of honesty. Now, in the glow of that fragile truth, all previous animosity seemed trivial against the vast backdrop of the present. Without a word, Damian reached across the table, gently taking Iris's hand in his. The subtle contact kindled a spark that was impossible to ignore. As the room filled with silence, punctuated only by the muted click of a clock on the wall, the professional boundaries that had long separated them melted away. Iris felt an irresistible pull toward him, a magnetic force that transformed their partnership renewal into a statement of something far more intimate. Time appeared to slow as Damian's eyes softened with an emotion that was both tender and sincere. "Iris, I know everything we've been through has been fraught with tension and conflict, but I can no longer deny that what I feel for you is real," he whispered, his words spilling like a confession into the quiet space between them. In that charged moment, their professional and personal lives melded, testimony to the belief that love could indeed bridge even the deepest divides. The finality of their signed contract now seemed like a secondary note, overshadowed by the sudden clarity of their shared desire. Iris permitted herself a vulnerable smile, a gesture that balanced on the precipice of hope and fear. In response, Damian leaned closer. With an intensity born of years of quiet yearning, he brushed his lips against hers, a kiss that conveyed more than any spoken promise could. It was as if every friction, every unspoken grievance, and every moment of cautious indifference had been distilled into that single, breathtaking act. When they finally pulled away, the air between them was charged with both the weight of unburdened secrets and the buoyancy of new beginnings. The paper contracts, the business terms, and the legal formalities now all served as a backdrop to an unfolding story of reconciliation and revelation. Together, they realized that the truce they had established in professional realms was now extending to the realm of the heart, a partnership renewed in every sense. In the lingering aftermath of that first, passionate kiss, Iris and Damian sat quietly, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. They both understood that this was only the beginning. Past conflicts would need careful tending, and healing wounds would require time and tenderness. Yet, as the boardroom's soft light bore witness to their unity, both knew that love and genuine commitment could pave the way toward a future that embraced both triumphs in business and the delicate vulnerabilities of the human heart. Chapter 5. A Bittersweet New Dawn. The day began with a hesitant warmth, as sunlight filtered through the glass panels of the old country home where the extended family had gathered. It was a setting that echoed both old wounds and new possibilities. In the spacious living room, where generations of stories and disputes had once clashed, laughter and murmured conversation now created a patchwork of forgiveness, slowly stitching itself together. Evan, the story's protagonist, moved quietly among the familiar faces, some still marked by the echoes of past conflicts, others softened by the passage of time. Today, as he exchanged gentle words and measured smiles, he carried with him not just his own history of sorrow, but also the delicate promise of renewal. Here, his relationship with Lena, his steadfast love against the backdrop of personal turbulence, subtly evolved at each shared glance and unspoken promise. Around a long dining table, laden with hearty fare and reminiscent of childhood family feasts, old disputes were acknowledged in the subdued tones of whispered admissions. His uncle, once a fierce adversary in their painful familial splits, now found himself extending a sincere apology, a moment that, while painful to relive, paved the way toward closing some of the most stubborn chasms. Evan listened intently, absorbing the weight of every word, recognizing that healing was an intricate process, a mosaic pieced together by both sorrow and hope. Lena's steady presence drew him closer as the evening unfolded. Together, they initiated gentle discussions among the scatter of relatives about learning from shared mistakes while daring to build something new. In an intimate corner away from the boisterous family debates, they sat quietly, the rustle of salt crystals on their table mirroring the myriad emotions swirling within. "We can't erase our past," Lena murmured, her hand resting on his, "but every dawn offers us the grace to start over." This conversation was not merely a reflection of personal feelings, but a declaration of their alliance, a pact born from trials and tested through discord. Their dialogue underscored the need for cautious hope, a realistic acknowledgement that while some conflicts would always linger in the recesses of the mind, there was a strength in deciding to face them together. As they planned a future infused with possibility, they also embraced the inherent bittersweet tinge of knowing that some scars would never fully fade. Outside, dusk unfurled over a garden that echoed with the murmur of remembered voices and the soft shuffle of reconciliation. The family gathered once more, this time in a circle under the twilight sky, a forum where old quarrels and unresolved tensions were permitted one final airing. In the solemnity of the moment, Evan spoke softly of forgiveness and of accepting the imperfections that made every individual a piece of the larger, aching whole. His words carried the weight of unresolved disputes, yet also resonated with the determination to move forward, proving that even in shared pain there could be laughter and new bonds form. The evening wound down, with an undercurrent of both celebration and reflection, each family member carrying their own private burdens, even as they celebrated the collective progress made. In the aftermath of a long day, as the last of the guests took their leave, Evan and Lena remained, standing side by side, in the cool night air. Overhead, stars began to puncture the inky sky, silent witnesses to the fragile triumph of acceptance after years of lingering silence and confrontation. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was an ephemeral mix of vulnerability and unwavering strength. It was a moment that encapsulated both the softness of resilience and the distance left by old grievances. In the quiet that followed, Lena reminded him, "We have come so far. This isn't just about overcoming the past. It's about embracing the chance to be who we truly are, even if that means living with traces of what hurt us once." Evan recalled the painful chapters of his life and the family discord that had almost broken him, recognizing them now as necessary stepping stones in his journey to self-acceptance. That night, the conversations of the day echoed in his mind, mingling regret with relief. What remained was a deep yet realistic commitment to not only heal himself, but also to help heal the family that had defined every facet of his existence. The scene closed on a note that was both tender and unapologetically real. Even as a quiet rain began to drizzle across the garden, it washed over them in a silent benediction, a reminder that even the most sorrowful nights can herald a new dawn. With lingering complexities, unresolved tensions, and a cautious hope that glimmered through their shared determination, Evan and Lena stepped into the future hand in hand.